everyone, it's Kerry back with you today. I've been making these fun little window pockets and I've used a couple of Rennie's Digis because I wanted to create a contrast between the front part of the pocket with the window and then what was going on in the background, so that even when I took the tag out there was still some interest in the background there. So these ones I have created double-sided and they are so super quick and easy to make, so I'll grab some supplies and I'll show you how I did it. So I went into the watercolour bits and pieces kit and I've printed out these two sheets. Now these sheets actually come in two other sizes as well, smaller and then teeny tiny, but I'm just printing the big ones today for these pockets. And then I went into, I think it's Vintage Pages Pack 4, and I selected some of the papers in different colours so that I could pick some contrasts to my frames. And I've already started chopping out some of these. Now these ones I printed out on a 200 GSM paperweight, and the other ones, these ones, I've just printed out on I think it was either 80 or 100 GSM. And I've gone ahead and I've cut out some of these cards here. So I've got three different ones here, and I'll show you the three different ways that I have used to make my windows. So first thing I do after I've cut them out is I fold my card in half, and that should get me roughly on that line there. And then I decide which side I want my frame to be cut out of. So I think I'll use, what did I use over here? Let's use something different. So I haven't used this pink side, so I'll do a pink one. And the first way that I'm going to use is by measuring and then cutting out a frame with my ruler and blade. So just to make this a little bit easier, I'm just going to mark the middle here, just so you can see where that crease is a little bit easier. And what I'll do is I'll just come in roughly 2 centimetres all the way round. Doesn't have to be precise. The collage on the outside is actually quite forgiving. So roughly 13, so I'm going to go to 11. And then I'm just going to draw some lines as a guide for me. Okay, so basically I want to cut this rectangle out here. And then using a blade and my ruler, I'm just going to cut out the middle. So that gives me my frame there, and then I've got this little piece left over which I can use in another project. So I'm just going to set this one aside for the moment, and I'll show you some of the other ways to cut out the hole. Okay, so I've folded my other cards in half, and for this one we're going to end up with a similar sort of shape to this one, but rather than having to measure everything, I'm just bringing in my massive square punch and I'm going to push that up. Now if you don't feel confident sort of eyeballing it to get the middle, you might want to do some measuring, but I'm just basically lining up the edges of this bit of my punch here and making sure the distance here and here is roughly the same. Making sure that I've got my card pushed all the way to the back of the punch. And I'll just punch out that square. And again, I've got this bit to use later. Then I can turn around my punch, and this time I can line up the edges of my square here with the inside of my punch. So hopefully you can see that there. And when I think they're lined up, I need to just make sure that I'm pushed up square against the top here. Take that bit out for later. And now I've got my rectangle already punched out without having to sort of do all that ruling and measuring. But if you don't have one of those punches, you can just use the ruling method. Or if you don't like ruling things and you feel like you're always going to get it wrong, the other thing that you can do is just work out which side you want to use. I'm just going to cut a little cross in there with my blade to begin with. Now I'm actually going to turn this upside down because when I tear, I don't want a big white edge on this side. So if I do it upside down, the white edge will be in the middle. And I'm eyeballing, so I'm just going to fold that back that way. When I tear this, I'm going to be eyeballing so that the distance here is roughly the same all the way around, and I want it probably about between 1 and 2 centimetres. Now if you feel like you need to tear this bit off to make it easier, just do that. And it's easier to tear off a little bit less and then go back and fix up the edges if you feel like you need to. So now I have my little torn rectangle hole here as well. Now the only thing with tearing it out with a rectangle is you don't have a nice square or rectangle piece to use later on, but you can still use these in collage if you wanted to. Okay, so I've got my 3 basic frames here, and I want to use some contrasting coloured backgrounds. So I'm going to bring in the vintage pages here from the Vintage Pages pack, and with this browny sort of green, then I think blue will contrast that quite nicely. But I want a piece, so if I use just that piece, that's all of the same sort of text. So I'm going to have a bit of a play around until I find a bit that I like. I quite like that bit there because I get sort of 3 different pieces. I think I quite like that bit there. So I'm just going to take my pen and roughly mark where I need to cut. And I'm just going to cut slightly bigger than what I need. Okay, so I'm quite happy with how that looks. Now when this is going to be a top loading pocket. If you're going to have a side loading pocket, you'll need to make sure that when you're lining up your papers, you want to have the edge of your paper covering the edge of your back of the pocket piece, so that when you're sliding things in and out of the pocket, you don't see like a little bit of a white edge here. So for example, I think it was this one. Was it this one? So on this one, I didn't line it up correctly. So you can see that little bit of white peeking through there. It didn't look so bad because the inside of this is quite light anyway. So I think I could get away with that. So it's just easier if you make sure that it's lined up. Now it's okay to go over because we can trim it up after the fact. So I'm just going to double check that again. Yep, that's good enough. Bring in my glue book. It's a bit sticky still. And I'm just going to use a glue stick to glue it in. It doesn't matter whether you go right to the bottom or not. So this one's going to be top loading. Make sure I've got my frame up the right way, and making sure that I'm covering that top area there. Now I know there's a little bit of a gap here, but that doesn't matter too much because I'm going to stitch around the edge so you won't see that. And I find it's much easier if you make sure that this backing page doesn't cross over your score line here, otherwise it makes it hard to fold that back onto itself. So I'm just going to press that down, and then I can go around the edge and snip off anything that's overhanging. So there we go. So I've got a nice contrast between my the back of what will be my pocket and my frame. So I'm just going to go ahead and pick some other contrasting ones for these two. Okay, I might make this one a side-loading pocket, so I want to make sure that my backing paper is going to be flush with this edge, which means I need to cut a little bit extra off here so that I can easily fold my line. So I'm just going to have a little bit of a look. Okay, so cut along there. And that's going to allow me to close that nice and easily. So I'll glue that one down in a sec. And then this one, do I want to do side loading or top loading? I might have it around that way, and I might make this one a side loading one as well. So I need to cut roughly along this line here. And yep, that's going to be fine like that. So I'm going to go ahead and glue these backing papers down now. Okay, I've got my background papers in, and I'm just going to trim my excess off the edges here. Might use my blade this time. Now is a good time to ink before we cut the acetate, so I'm just going to grab some ink and do that. Okay, so I've got a sheet of acetate here. If you don't have any acetate, you could use something like a cellophane bag. You could use a laminating pouch that you've run through the laminator with nothing in it. But quite often our packaging comes with bits of acetate in, so you can find lots of acetate or alternatives if you have a look around. Even food packaging sometimes has acetate in. Now, when I'm putting my acetate in, I want the top of my acetate to line up with the top of the pocket, just so it makes it easier for getting things in and out. If I stuck my acetate in lower than the edge of my pocket, when I'm putting the tag in and out, it might catch on the edge of this laminate and, just be a little bit problematic to get in and out. So I want to make sure that my laminate is as tall as my pocket and then covering the hole in my pocket here. So it doesn't have to come right to the bottom. So I'm just going to turn it around this way because I think I'll get two across. And I'm just going to get my pen and probably about that much. So I'll bring in my cutting board again. And then this I know I can cut in half. And that'll be plenty for each side. So these will be too big for my pockets, and I'll just have to trim them down once I've got them in place. So for this I'm going to use some art glitter glue, and I actually find it easier to put it on the frame rather than on the acetate. And I leave about 1/2 centimetre, or maybe a bit more, around the edges so that my glue doesn't ooze out into the front of my frame as much as possible. I'm just going to pop that on and make sure that I'm up against the top, and also make sure that I'm not going over the side part of this crease. Then I'm just going to gently push down onto my glue. If I have any oozing out, I can just wipe that off with a tissue. So I'll just set that aside for a sec and I'll do the other two. Okay, so I'm just bringing my first one back in now, and I can use my blade to cut off the extra there. So my pockets are basically constructed, and I just need to close my pockets now. So this one's a side loading pocket. So I'm going to take it to my sewing machine and I'm just going to stitch around the edges. Now if you want to also have a band of stitching across the top or the entry part of the pocket, you need to stitch it open, otherwise you're going to seal the pocket. So stitch along here first and then close up your pocket and stitch around the edges, and then that way you'll have the illusion that there is stitching all the way around. So I've just run a row of stitching down here, but my pocket is still open. So now I'm going to go back to my sewing machine and I'm going to stitch along these three sides with my pocket closed. So now I have my little side loading pocket this way, and I've just stitched around the edges, and I'm just going to go ahead and ink all the way around the edges on both sides now. So there we go, that's my little pocket all inked and ready to have a tag made for it. You don't have to sew, you can of course just glue around the edges, so I'll just glue this one. And because this is going to be side loading, I just need to glue along here. And on this side as well. Closing over and pressing down and just giving that some time to adhere. So this one's going to be a top loading pocket, and I'm not going to run a row of stitching there, I'm just going to stitch around the edges. So I'll be back in a sec. So I decided with this one that before I would stitch the pocket closed, I would run a row of decorative stitching just around my acetate window there. So now I'm going to go and close up my pocket. So that's my third pocket there, and it's got the opening at the top here. So then you would just need to make some journaling cards or whatever to pop into your pockets. So they're really quick and easy to make, and even without anything in them, I think they look quite pretty. You can of course vary up the way that you make them. So this one I just used a circle punch, and then I've popped a butterfly on the tag that goes in and out of the pocket. So because they're double-sided, they can pretty much go anywhere in a journal, just clipped in. So I've really enjoyed making these cute little window pockets. I will leave links in the description box below to both the kits that I used in today's video, but of course you don't need to use a kit. You can just use whatever pages, scrapbooking paper, cardstock or book pages, that sort of thing. Thanks so much for joining me today. I'll see you again next time. Bye!